Welcome to Inside PTI, weekly videos designed to give you the trial results you want, the agronomy explanations you need, and insights to set you up for success this growing season. Today we're going to talk about managing row cleaners. You know, from an agronomic perspective, row cleaners really are about managing residue to try to keep that surface and very top inch or so of residue that might be incorporated in the soil out of the seed trench. You know, there's really four problems when we get residue down in the furrow with the seed. The first one is that residue is going to wick moisture away from the seed. And so a seed with moisture up against it is going to have less seed available moisture than will a seed just surrounded by 360 degrees of soil. The seed with residue beside it will emerge late. Issue number two is the seed with residue beside it is actually going to not have as much temperature. So that residue acts as insulation and it pulls away some of the heat, and that seed might take longer to germinate and then emerge later because it's going to experience some cooler temperatures. Issue number three is really around diseases. Residue that's down in the trench can have an autotoxic effect on that emerging seed, where it actually creates a seedling blight, and you can actually have a young seedling die because of the toxicity in seedling diseases. And then the fourth issue is around nutrient availability. You know, so early on that seedling is needing some nutrients, especially phosphorus, to grow. But microbes, as the soil warms up, like to feed on residue. That's their food. And so the microbes consume fertility. And so as you have microbes feeding on residue, tying up fertility, as well as that plant trying to get the fertility, the plant has less available fertility. So those are those four issues. So as we then think about setting up a planter for success with row cleaners, there's a few considerations that need to be made. You know, the first is, what's the type of row cleaner that we're going to put on the planter? There's two real basic types of row cleaners out in the marketplace. There's ones that are fixed, meaning they're just fixed in a certain spot. You can adjust them up and down, but they don't move. The second is floating, and floating actually follow contours of the ground. Now, adjusting either of these styles is important. Fixed, if they encounter any rises or dips in the ground, are going to plow, potentially lifting the row unit up out of the ground and causing shallow planted seeds, and as you go through a dip, they might miss some residue. So they're not the ideal scenario to have on a planter in most cases, unless you have perfectly level ground like this tabletop. Floating row cleaners are more advantageous as they can move and follow those ground contours. The question is, you got to get them adjusted right. And we'll talk about adjusting row cleaners here in a moment. The second consideration when setting up a planter is, what row cleaner wheel style are you going to put on those floating row cleaners? There's two basic wheel styles as well. One scenario is called different things by different manufacturers, but a shark tooth, a razor wheel, or a scissor wheel that has a larger tooth and a larger surface area. What those are designed for is to cut and move residue, cover crops, anything in its way. The larger surface area allows it to move more material. Now, in a more conventionally tilled environment, they can move soil, which is a negative. The other style is a finger or a beveled or a tine style. And so they're just the tines, and they're designed where if you have residue mixed in the surface of the soil, they can pick through that soil and kind of aerate, let the soil fall back in and be there and not move the soil, but they can pick some residue out of that top inch or so of soil. So neither one is wrong, but just like you wouldn't want to grab a crescent wrench to frame up a house, you want a hammer for that, you really need to use the right tool for the right job. So the razor wheel, the shark tooth, the scissor wheel, those types should be reserved for those heavier residue situations where you need to cut and move. I've personally experienced where trying to set those to really move that top inch or the residue in the top inch of soil away, you can actually plow soil out of the way, creating a berm on the side of the row cleaner, which then the gauge wheel, the planter, can run on, meaning it's up higher and you compromise depth, and that's a negative. So reserve the more aggressive styles for the no-till or the cover crop environment. The finger beveled style, reserve those for your minimum till to conventional tilled styles. So once we have a row cleaner set up properly, then we want to figure out, how do we adjust it when we get that row cleaner set up properly. Now, at the PTI farm in 2019, we ran a study where we adjusted row cleaners three different ways. The first way was no row cleaner at all, where we basically picked them up, they were not engaged with the soil, and we just had the disc opener being the first thing that touched the soil. The second way was full float, so we just let them float all the way down, the full weight of the row cleaner engaged with the soil. The third way was by adjusting them to what the operator saw as optimal, and this was using a product called Clean Sweep, which allows you to adjust row cleaners from the cab, and an air cylinder applies down or lift force to the row cleaner. In this scenario, about 20 psi of lift was the correct setting at the PTI farm. So what are the results? Running no row cleaner at all was about a 26 bushel per acre loss. That's a significant loss. We'll explain why in just a moment. Running the row cleaners in full float was about a 3 bushel loss compared to running them with the adjustment of about 20 psi of lift force on the row cleaners. So compared to 20 psi of lift, 26 bushel from no row cleaner lost, and 3 bushel lost from having them just full float. Now, why the 26 bushel loss? Because a lot of you are probably sitting here saying, wow, that's a lot. Why would that be? Well, we talked about the 4 issues of having residue in the seed trench. 2019 provided its own set of challenges that was unique. If you remember back to 2019, a lot of rain, especially in Pontiac, Illinois, and then when it did quit raining, it turned off dry, became about 90 degrees the week after it quit raining. So you go from saturated soils to baked soils. As the tillage tool came through, it created a lot of clods. It was not a great seed bed. However, we were able to then use the row cleaners to remove some of those clods. So without using row cleaners and having them lifted up, the reason for that 26 bushel loss was because the disc openers were essentially running and placing seeds in clods. There were air pockets, not a lot of moisture, a really poor environment. With Clean Sweep adjusted and having about 20 psi of lift on the row cleaners, they're still engaged with the ground, sweeping those clods aside, getting some good soil and some good moisture. Now, generally, that's not a great way to run row cleaners, is to plow, but being able to adjust them from the cab in this unique situation in 2019 at the PTI farm really proved itself with that 26 bushel and that high return on investment from an economic perspective from running the row cleaners. So today's Inside PTI agronomy tip of the day is make sure your planter is set up for success by having row cleaners that can be adjusted from the cab, that are floating, and have the correct wheel style on them. That in-cab adjustment can either be through a Gen 3 2020 or through a manual control box if you don't have a Gen 3. So make sure your planter is set up for success from a residue management perspective. That's all we have for today. For more information, please reach out to any Precision Planting Premier dealer or email us at InsidePTI@precisionplanting.com. We'll see you next time on Inside PTI.